The highlights recovery slider in Lightroom is a really useful tool because what it effectively enables us to do is extend the tonal range of our shot. A well-exposed raw file will actually contain a certain amount of data in the shadow end and also at the highlight end, and this might not be immediately visible in a straight shot, but with proper processing you can actually extend that tonal range quite considerably, which is really helpful if you're shooting towards a window where you've got this disparity between a brightly illuminated garden and a relatively dark interior. You'll see here the light is really burning out on the floorboards and reflecting in the kitchen work surfaces here, and I'd like really to have that view slightly better processed for the final shot. With one slide of the exposure the highlight slider, I can take it to this, and I've regained a whole load of detail in the floorboards there and on the work surface through the windows here. That's the original. Again, one operation and I'm going to that. I'm not having to make complex masks of this window. I'm not having to underexpose and use a lot more fill flash. Just one movement and I'm getting this. So I think for real estate photography and interiors work, it's a nice tool to have at your disposal. So we're going to take a look at how the highlights recovery slider works in practice. And to do this, I've got this series of grey rectangles, which is not the most inspirational picture I know, but bear with me. I've simply printed out a bunch of grey squares and photographed them with my Canon, and it's no bad exercise to do this to see just how the various raw file adjustments that you can carry out in Lightroom affect your images. So the square that interests me is this sort of middle grey square here. As I mouse over it, you can see the values, the RGB values appearing beneath the histogram over here, and they're around about the mid-50s. Now, let's say that I had some interesting information in my raw file that was pretty light. It was round about here. You can see the value is about 90, and I'd like that to be a little bit darker. Let's say that was the view through a window and I want to pull that down a little bit. Now, the immediate solution might possibly be to use the exposure slider and pull that down a stop. You see here I've moved the exposure slider, and I've indeed taken that value that was 90 down to about 78. So it's done what I wanted it to do, but look what the exposure slider has done to all the other values. Our middle grey value that was in the mid-50s is now down to 33. The shadows have become really dark and dingy. That's our starting file, and by moving the exposure slider all the way down, that's really blocked up these shadow areas. Let's look at this in practice, because here's our standard shot, and I find it's a really useful exercise. If you just press V on your keyboard, you can convert this to black and white. It's really helpful if you're just looking at the tonal values of your picture. You can always go back to colour later on. So that's the straight shot in black and white, no adjustments. And again, if I am tempted to move the exposure slider -1, move it to the left, underexpose, that's great. I'm certainly getting my detail in the floorboards here and through the window, etc., as I would like to see, but of course at the expense of the shadow areas. I'm really blocking up those shadows by using the exposure slider. So let's, this time, rather than moving the exposure slider, we're going to move the highlight slider all the way to the left. We go back to our high value here. We've taken that down to 80 from 90 where it was, so we've taken down those rather blitzed highlights to something more manageable and tonally readable. But the nice thing about the highlight slider is that it's preferentially adjusted the brighter values so that our middle grey is still, it's gone down a little bit, it's down to 50 from 55. That's where we kicked off, so that's 53 or so. Moving the highlight slider, we've actually kept our middle values and our middle values in the same place, and importantly our shadows haven't become really blocked up, but we have taken those upper values down. So to go to this one in black and white, here's the shot. We've kept some nice shadow detail such as it is in the file, but we've managed to burn in detail in the highlights. So rather than pulling everything down with the exposure slider, which affects all the tones in the image, we're just using the highlight slider to give that nice effect of burning in the upper level and keeping those shadow levels intact. Now, a word of caution. If I go back to my file, when you apply a negative highlight adjustment, it's great, we think, fantastic. I can not have to use so much fill flash, it's halfway to HDR, it's a really great solution. It certainly is all of those things, but there is a danger that it can veil these highlights in places where you'd really like the image to appear quite crisp. And so if we go to our color shot, if I take off the highlights adjustment, you'll notice that these walls here become a little crisper and sparkier than when we apply the highlights adjustment. There is a danger that as you pull it down, those other areas which you don't want to be darkened so much are pulled down a little bit. And what I simply do there, I apply my negative highlights adjustment. It might not always be negative 100. I then go to the local adjustment brush and apply this time a positive highlight adjustment and just brush over those areas where I'd like to see the image have a little more lift and I can afford for it to be a little lighter in tone, just to stop it getting too muddy in those mid-tones. It doesn't take very long and you can use a big broad brush, and I think it makes a better image. So the message is you can use the highlight recovery slider. It's a great solution, but use it with care and understand what it's doing to the tonal values of your image. But other than that, it's a great thing to add in conjunction with your existing methods.